The late night visitor. Home alone, surrounded by the comforting silence of an empty house. I thought I was safe, but as the witching hour crept closer and shadows deepened around me, I would soon learn just how wrong I was. Sometimes, the things that find their way to your doorstep in the dead of night aren't strangers, but echoes from a past you thought was long buried. A couple of years ago, I was home alone. Truly alone. My family had left for vacation, which meant I had the entire shadow-filled, silent house to myself. I'd been working endless hours that week, and finally, it was my day off. Perfect timing, right? I thought it'd be a good idea to call some friends over for a few drinks to unwind. We ended up having a great time, laughing and sharing stories until around 11 p. When, one by one, everyone decided to head home. Drunk, tired, and grateful for the silence. I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and stumbled up the stairs to my room, where I crashed into bed. Not a care in the world. I was dead asleep when the sound jolted me awake. Ding-dong. The doorbell rang, piercing the silence. My heart thudded in my chest as I squinted at my clock. It was 4 a.m. Verkatha, the dead of night. My foggy, alcohol-soaked brain struggled to process what was happening. Was it a dream? I waited, heart pounding, listening to the thick silence. When it rang again, ding-dong, reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed, my steps sluggish and uncertain, as I made my way to the hallway. Who could be at the door? I mumbled to myself, trying to shake off the drunken grogginess. As I neared the door, a knot began to form in my stomach. What if something had happened to one of my friends? Maybe they'd had an accident on their way home, or maybe one of them forgot something. In my bleary state, I didn't think twice and just opened the door. Standing there, illuminated by the faint glow of my porch light, was my ex-girlfriend, Ginny. We hadn't parted on good terms. She cheated. I was crushed, and the breakup was a mess. She'd tried to reach out several times afterward, messaging me from blocked numbers, even emailing me after I'd cut her off on social media. It took me months to finally move on. And now, after all this time, here she was, looking straight at me with an unreadable expression. I managed a weak, hi, Ginny. What are you doing here? Without a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward, right into my house, her voice soft and unsettling, as she replied, I just wanted to talk to you. Her eyes bore into mine, a strange glint flickering in them. It's been a while. Yut! I glanced at the clock on the wall again, my head spinning. Do you know what time it is? I asked, forcing a chuckle, trying to keep things light even though something about her was off. Oh, I know, she said, her voice lilting in that strange way. But I figured you'd be home alone. I was right, wasn't I? A chill slithered down my spine. How did she know my family was gone? I hadn't told anyone, especially not her. How did you know that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, I just knew. she whispered, shrugging in a way that was almost dismissive. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a second, she looked almost vulnerable. Then, she asked, voice barely above a murmur, "Can I come inside?" Every nerve in my body screamed at me to say no, but before I could answer, she had already pushed past me, stepping into my living room. She reached down and petted my dog, who wagged his tail hesitantly. My instincts were warring with a strange, unexplainable guilt. Yeah, sure, I guess, I mumbled, feeling cornered. We sat down, and she started talking, but the conversation was shallow, forced. She was talking about how her life was. You said, "Okay, story 2 with introduction," ChatGPT said. ChatGPT introduction to story 2. The persistent haunter. Some people leave behind lingering echoes in your life, refusing to let go, tethering themselves to you long after the ties should have been severed. My ex was one of those, a ghost bound to haunt me, not through apparitions, but through messages, persistent reminders that he was still there, and perhaps never really gone. But this time, it was different. This time, his silence felt like the quiet before a storm. Story 2. The Persistent Haunter. From a young age, I was naive, so very naive. I fell for him when I was just a teenager, young, impressionable, and completely blind to the darkness lurking within. He was older, charming, and seemed like he could fix everything wrong in my world. But behind that facade, he was manipulative, controlling, and twisted. His abuse was like poison, administered slowly, one drop at a time. And I, young and blinded by the illusion of love, took it all, excusing every cruel word, every manipulative game, every act of gaslighting. For 8 years, I let him erode my sense of self, until there was almost nothing left. He never hit me. No, he was too clever for that. Physical abuse could be seen, could leave evidence, but his cruelty? It was far worse, hidden behind words and glances, slicing into my psyche, leaving scars no one else could see. It was only when I turned 17, somehow a lifetime older than the girl who'd first met him, that I found the strength to leave. I broke free from his grasp, cutting off all contact, blocking his number, his social media accounts, his emails, but he refused to let me go. Every month, on the same day, at the same time, like a sick ritual, a message would arrive, a short, haunting phrase. "I'm still here." I'd see the notification and feel my stomach drop, my pulse quicken. It didn't matter that I deleted each message, hoping it would be the last. Every month, the same chilling reminder. He hadn't moved on. He was watching, waiting. I couldn't block him enough. He'd find new numbers, create fake profiles, use burner accounts. Nothing stopped him. His presence clung to my life like a shadow. And no matter where I went, it was there, watching, haunting. For 6 years, he sent those messages, unwavering in his persistence, each one striking a chord of fear and disgust within me. I couldn't report him to the police. He hadn't broken any laws, technically. No one seemed to understand how much those words weighed on me, how they twisted my peace of mind into something brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. But then, something strange happened. 2 months ago, the messages stopped. I'd expected the monthly reminder like always, but it never came. Days turned to weeks, and the eerie silence grew louder, more unsettling. I felt relief at first, of course. Who wouldn't? But that relief quickly turned sour, tainted by an inexplicable sense of dread. Some people leave behind lingering echoes in your life, refusing to let go, tethering themselves to you long after the ties should have been severed. My ex was one of those, a ghost bound to haunt me not through apparitions, but through messages, persistent reminders that he was still there, and perhaps never really gone. But this time, it was different. This time, his silence felt like the quiet before a storm. From a young age, I was naive, so very naive. I fell for him when I was just a teenager, young, impressionable, and completely blind to the darkness lurking within. He was older, charming, and seemed like he could fix everything wrong in my world. But behind that facade, he was manipulative, controlling, and twisted. His abuse was like poison, administered slowly, one drop at a time. And I, young and blinded by the illusion of love, took it all, excusing every cruel word, every manipulative game, every act of gaslighting. For 8 years, I let him erode my sense of self, until there was almost nothing left. He never hit me. No, he was too clever for that. Physical abuse could be seen, could leave evidence. But his cruelty? It was far worse, hidden behind words and glances, slicing into my psyche, leaving scars no one else could see. It was only when I turned 17, somehow a lifetime older than the girl who'd first met him, that I found the strength to leave. I broke free from his grasp, cutting off all contact, blocking his number, his social media accounts, his emails. But he refused to let me go. Every month, on the same day, at the same time, like a sick ritual, a message would arrive. A short, haunting phrase. I'm still here. I'd see the notification and feel my stomach drop, my pulse quicken. It didn't matter that I'd deleted each message, hoping it would be the last. Every month, the same chilling reminder. He hadn't moved on. He was watching, waiting. I couldn't block him enough. He'd find new numbers, create fake profiles, use burner accounts. Nothing stopped him. His presence clung to my life like a shadow. And no matter where I went, it was there. Watching, haunting. For 6 years, he sent those messages, unwavering in his persistence, each one striking a chord of fear and disgust within me. I couldn't report him to the police. He hadn't broken any laws, technically. No one seemed to understand how much those words weighed on me, how they twisted my peace of mind into something brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. But then, something strange happened. 2 months ago, the messages stopped. I'd expected the monthly reminder like always, but it never came. Days turned to weeks, and the eerie silence grew louder, more unsettling. I felt relief at first, of course. Who wouldn't? But that relief quickly turned sour, tainted by an inexplicable sense of dread. You said, and rewrite story, didn't copy. Same ChatGPT said, ChatGPT introduction to story. 2. The persistent haunter. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds leave scars too deep to disappear. Some shadows refuse to fade, lingering long after they should be gone. For years, my ex haunted me, a ghost clinging to my life in the most invasive, unnerving way. Month after month, he reminded me of his presence with an unsettling regularity that gnawed away at my peace. And then the messages stopped. But silence can be louder than words, and this quiet felt like the dark calm before an incoming storm. Story 2. The persistent haunter. Looking back, it's so clear. I was young and blindly trusting, vulnerable to the kind of love that seeps in slowly, its sharp edges hidden under sweet words. I fell hard, clinging to promises and dreams, never seeing the shadows lurking beneath. He was magnetic and seemed so in control, which only made my naive heart more attached. But what I didn't understand then, what I would come to know all too well, was that his charm hid a manipulative cruelty I couldn't have imagined. For 8 years I endured. He was never violent in the physical sense. No, his tactics were far more insidious. He wormed his way into every corner of my mind, using manipulation, gaslighting, and subtle humiliation to wear down my spirit. Little by little, his carefully aimed words made me doubt myself, made me feel worthless. Every time I thought of leaving, he'd twist his words, making me believe I was the one in the wrong, or worse, that no one else could ever love me. Finally, at 17, I broke free. The act of leaving was painful, yet freeing, and I did everything I could to sever ties with him. Blocked him on every social platform, changed my number, and even cut contact with mutual friends. But he wasn't ready to let go. Every month, like some dark ritual, a message would appear. Just 3 words. I'm still here. At first, I felt a chill with every notification. I'd see his words, and an uneasy, nauseating dread would settle in the pit of my stomach. How could he still be there? How could he still cling on, so determined to keep himself tied to my life? Yet, month after month, those words returned. Even though I blocked each number, even though I shut out his presence everywhere I could, he always found a way. New numbers, fake accounts, burner phones. His messages slipped through every barrier I'd set up. 6 years of those relentless messages passed. 6 years of constant reminders that he hadn't moved on, hadn't forgotten. They arrived without fail, like some twisted anniversary, until the day I feared my whole life was being watched through a one-way mirror. Then, 2 months ago, the messages stopped. It was almost laughable. How I didn't believe it at first. I expected him to pop back up in some other invasive way. But as weeks went by in silence, I began to feel the strange weight of absence. For once, he wasn't there, lurking in the shadows of my life, haunting my notifications. I wanted to feel relief. I should have felt relief. But as the days went on, my unease grew. Had he found something better to do? Had he lost interest? Or was he merely waiting, biding his time before making his next move? The silence, which should have been a gift, felt more like a tension ready to snap. That haunting absence gnawed at me more than any of his messages ever did. For all those years, his words had kept him real, a reminder that he was there but manageable in his own twisted way. But now he was gone, and that silence was a void I couldn't escape. It felt as if he had receded just far enough that I couldn't see him, yet close enough that he might reappear at any moment, in some way I couldn't prepare for. Love can be a beautiful escape, but sometimes it's a trap, binding you in invisible chains that grow tighter with every heartbeat. I thought I'd found someone sweet, someone safe, but his affection twisted into something dark, something suffocating. What began as flattery quickly turned to fear, and I soon realized I'd stepped into a nightmare disguised as love. A couple of years back, I was left alone at home. My family was out on vacation, leaving me the rare chance to have the entire house to myself. The quiet that normally would have felt comforting started to take on a strange quality. But that first night, with nothing but a dull buzz from hours of work and exhaustion weighing me down, I thought nothing of it. After an exhausting work week, I was ready to relax. So, I called up a few friends and had them over for a night of laughter, cold beers, and conversations that ran long into the night. By 11 p. The night wound down, and one by one, my friends left, leaving me alone once more in a house that felt a little quieter than it should have. I locked up the doors, feeling slightly tipsy, and trudged upstairs to bed, ready for a night of undisturbed sleep. Somewhere in the depths of my sleep, I was jolted awake by a harsh, insistent sound. Ding-dong, the doorbell. Disoriented and half-drunk, I forced myself to sit up, convinced I was imagining things. But there it was again, that chilling ding-dong echoing through the silent house. It was around 4 Osta, and a strange sensation crept over me. Who could be at my door at such an ungodly hour? Maybe it was one of my friends who had left something behind. Or worse, maybe one of them had gotten into trouble on the way home. As I made my way downstairs, each step heavier than the last, unease crept up my spine. The house was dark, and every shadow seemed to twist and grow, reaching out for me. When I reached the front door, I paused, squinting through the peephole to see if anyone was there. I almost stumbled back when I saw a face staring back. My ex-girlfriend, Jenny. We hadn't spoken in months, and our breakup had been ugly. She had been the kind of girl who didn't let go. The kind who showed up unannounced, even though I had done everything I could to erase her from my life. Seeing her at my door in the dead of night felt surreal. I hesitated, but against all logic, opened the door. Hi? I stammered, barely able to make sense of her sudden appearance. Jenny's eyes bore into mine, intense and unnerving. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she replied, "I just wanted to talk." "Do you know what time it is?" I asked, feeling irritation prickling at the back of my neck, masking the deeper fear stirring within me. Yeah, I know," she said, brushing it off. I was on my way somewhere and thought I'd drop by. Her voice trailed off as her eyes darted around, sizing up the emptiness of the house. A cold realization hit me. How did she know my family was out of town? My pulse quickened as I stared at her, the dim light casting long shadows across her face, making her expression unreadable. She asked if she could come inside, and against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in the living room, where she seemed more intent on glancing around the house than actually talking to me. My dogs, who usually adored her, kept a strange distance, their ears back, growling softly under their breaths. She sat close to me on the couch, almost too close, and I could feel her hand resting in the pocket of her hoodie, gripping something tightly. My heart began to pound, an irrational fear taking root. Was she holding something? Something dangerous? Jenny launched into a half-hearted apology, talking about how things had ended between us, her voice a strange mixture of bitterness and pleading. I tried to focus on her words, but the eerie quiet of the house seemed to press in around us. She edged closer, her eyes not leaving mine, and a chill ran down my spine as her hand flexed inside her pocket. Suddenly, she leaned in close, her face inches from mine. "Why do you always do this?" she whispered, her voice laced with something almost feral, her eyes wide and unblinking. One of my dogs began to bark, a frantic, warning bark that echoed through the living room, breaking the silence. Jenny's expression twisted into a mask of fury, her eyes widening, her teeth bared in a grimace as she stood up, glaring down at me. I stumbled backward, the room spinning as I tried to put space between us. "Get out," I said, my voice barely more than a shaky whisper. She didn't budge, standing there in the dim glow, her breathing heavy, her hand still gripping whatever was in her pocket. She turned slowly, looking at me with a strange mix of anger and sadness. But there was something else in her eyes, something dark that sent my stomach plummeting. Finally, she took a step toward the door, but as she reached the threshold, she turned back to me one last time, her lips curling into a twisted smile. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice low, almost like a growl, before stepping outside and disappearing into the shadows. The door clicked shut behind her, but I didn't move, too frozen by a lingering dread. The house felt colder, emptier than before, as if some dark presence had been left behind. I locked the door, deadbolt and all, and stayed awake until dawn, the memory of her words echoing in my mind. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing at the door late at night, half expecting to see her silhouette framed against the glass, that eerie smile on her lips, whispering that same dark promise. "You're going to regret this." There are some relationships that are hard to shake. They linger even when they've ended, like a shadow that stretches just a little too far, or a chill that touches your spine when you're alone. This is the story of such a relationship, a seemingly unbreakable bond that was both terrifying and uninvited, an attachment that didn't fade with distance, nor with time. I met him when I was young, just 15, and he was older, more experienced in the ways of manipulation than I could have ever been prepared for. For years, I thought he loved me, in his strange, controlling way. Even when his kindness turned to cruelty, when every word of his cut deep and left me questioning my worth, I believed it was my role to forgive him, and for nearly a decade I did. Our relationship was a maze of control and isolation. He never once laid a hand on me in anger, but he didn't need to. His words were sharper than any physical wound, twisting my reality and bending it to his will. He kept me bound to him, with each insult, each mind game, a little more of myself disappearing, until I was nothing more than his shadow, walking only in the path he allowed. I was 17 when I first felt the tremors of his real intentions. He began to isolate me, slowly making me lose touch with friends and family, until I felt alone, entirely dependent on him. He wore his cruelty like a second skin, casual, as if it were simply his way, and he made sure I believed that this was love, that this was what I deserved. Every time I tried to break free, he'd pull me back with an apology, with a smile that felt hollow but reassuring. At 23, I finally escaped, the thin thread of my strength snapping after years of silently enduring his torment. But I wasn't prepared for what would follow. It began with emails, benign at first, just reminders of his existence. Then came the texts, not just on my phone, but on old, forgotten numbers, even emails I didn't remember giving him. And the messages themselves were simple, haunting. The same words every time, like a taunt, like a curse. I'm still here. Every month, like clockwork, those 3 words would arrive. I'd block him, change my number, and somehow he'd find a way through. The messages persisted for years, 6 years to be exact, until one day they stopped. The silence was deafening, but I tried to convince myself it was over. Perhaps he'd finally moved on. Then, one day, I got engaged. For the first time, I felt genuinely free, secure in a love that didn't sting or suffocate. I made the announcement public, filled with relief and happiness, celebrating that he no longer had any hold on me. That very day, the messages stopped. For 2 blissful months, I heard nothing. I wanted to believe that he had finally let me go. Maybe he had found someone else to occupy his twisted affections. Maybe he'd moved on. But a creeping dread started to build inside of me. It was too quiet, too sudden, too easy. I'd gone years fighting to keep him out, only for him to simply stop when I least expected it. Then one night, I awoke to the chime of a notification, a message. My stomach dropped, and my hand shook as I picked up my phone. I'm still here. It was worse than before. The silence, having given those words more power, as if they'd come to life. A shadow, curling up from the screen to linger in the corners of my room. I could feel his presence pressing in on me, even though he was nowhere near. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. But it wasn't just the messages. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. Shadows where there should be none. Once, while I was driving home late at night, I noticed a car behind me, keeping pace, following me for miles through dark, empty roads. It stayed close, too close, its headlights glaring through my rearview mirror, so I could barely see. I made sharp turns, tried to lose it, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, it turned off. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but the feeling of being followed lingered, sticking to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The next morning, another message appeared, almost mocking in its simplicity. I'm still here. Days went by, and I could feel him drawing closer. He was no longer just a memory, but a presence in my life, unseen, but felt. Every creak in the house, every flickering light, every shiver down my spine, felt like a reminder that he wasn't gone. The walls seemed to close in on me, and sleep became impossible. I kept waking up at exactly 3:33 AC, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, as if he were standing just beyond the bedroom door, listening. One evening, while sitting alone in my living room, the phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to know. I picked it up, whispering a cautious, "Hello?" Silence, and then breathing. Slow and deliberate, like someone standing right beside me. The line went dead, and I sat there, the phone slipping from my hands, a cold dread settling into my bones. That night, the dreams began. Dark, shadowy dreams, where he stood at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting, his eyes glinting with that same cruel intent I remembered too well. The messages continue to this day, every month, like a promise that he hasn't forgotten me, even if he can't be near. I know he's out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And as much as I try to forget, to pretend he no longer exists, a part of me knows that he will never let me go. Sometimes, you meet people who hide a darkness beneath their charm, people who seem perfect at first glance, but as you get closer, the cracks begin to show, revealing something unsettling. This story is about one such encounter, a seemingly innocent romance that quickly spiraled into a nightmare. It started like any other online connection, innocent, friendly, maybe even a bit exciting. I met him on a forum where we started messaging casually, our conversations drifting from small talk to shared interests and jokes. He was charming, attentive, and for the first time in a while, I felt myself letting my guard down, allowing a connection to grow with someone I barely knew. But soon, I'd come to realize that he was far from the ordinary person he appeared to be. A few weeks in, he confessed that he had feelings for me. I was flattered, but cautious. Having just come out of a messy breakup, I wasn't ready for another relationship. However, he was persistent, gentle in his advances, always willing to wait. Against my better judgment, I allowed myself to get closer, eventually agreeing to meet him in person. When we finally met, he seemed even more charming, attentive, and kind in real life. But even then, something felt off. He was always watching me, not just casually glancing my way, but studying every expression, every movement. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself he was just nervous, eager to make a good impression. But as the days passed, His behavior became more intrusive. He'd call me constantly, at odd hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning, just to check on me. If I didn't answer, he'd flood my phone with messages, growing increasingly concerned, then angry, demanding to know where I was, who I was with. The turning point came one evening when I went out with some friends. I didn't think to tell him because it was a casual night out, nothing planned, just a spontaneous decision. But halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed incessantly with texts from him. "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me you were going out? Who are you with? Why are you ignoring me?" I ignored the messages, trying to enjoy the night, hoping he'd understand that I didn't need to account for every moment of my life. But then, the messages became disturbing. "I saw you leave your house tonight. You didn't look happy. Why didn't you smile for me?" My heart raced as I read the text. He had been outside my house, watching me, following me. I hadn't noticed anyone, hadn't sensed a presence, but now I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in on me. I excused myself from my friends, heart pounding, and rushed home. When I arrived, my phone buzzed again. "You shouldn't have left so suddenly. It's dangerous out there." The obsession only grew from there. He started following me, not just to my house, but to work, to the grocery store, even to my gym. No matter where I went, he found me, always lingering just out of sight, a shadow I could feel, but couldn't escape. I'd look over my shoulder and catch glimpses of him, staring at me from across the parking lot, or watching from a nearby bench. His gaze was unblinking, cold, almost predatory. It wasn't the gaze of a lover or a friend. It was the gaze of someone who believed I belonged to him. Desperation led me to confront him, hoping that a clear, firm boundary would make him stop. But when I told him to back off, to leave me alone, he just laughed, a low, eerie sound that sent chills down my spine. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper, but filled with menace. "Yo, you don't understand, do you? I'm the only one who truly sees you, the only one who really knows you. No one else cares about you the way I do. You'll come back to me. You have to." I tried to block him, but he created new accounts, found new numbers to contact me. He would leave voicemails filled with silence, only his breathing audible, heavy and slow, as if he was savoring every second. And his messages became more unsettling, filled with eerie insights into my daily life. He'd mention what I'd worn that day, who I'd spoken to, even my expressions. "You looked sad today. I don't like it when you're sad. Don't let anyone hurt you, or they'll regret it." I started seeing him everywhere, even in places I thought were safe. Outside my parents' house, at my sister's school, places he couldn't have known about. I'd see him across the street, standing in the shadows, watching me. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling a prickling sensation, as if someone was standing over me. I lay frozen, listening, and there it was, the faintest sound of breathing, so close, right outside my bedroom window. The police were no help. He hadn't technically done anything illegal. He hadn't hurt me or threatened me outright. But I could feel his presence, pressing down on me like a weight, a darkness I couldn't escape. He didn't need to hurt me physically. His mere existence was enough to terrorize me, to haunt me. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, planning to stay with a friend in another city, somewhere he wouldn't find me. But as I approached my car, I saw something glinting on the driver's seat through the window. I opened the door, and there it was. A bracelet I thought I'd lost months ago. Next to it was a note, scrawled in handwriting I knew all too well. I'll always find you. My hands shook as I held the note, the bracelet feeling cold and heavy in my hand. He'd been in my car somehow, without me knowing. I couldn't breathe, the realization sinking in that he wasn't just watching me. He was close, closer than I had ever imagined. And the worst part was, he wanted me to know it. Now, every night I check every window, every door, and I double lock them, triple checking each lock. But it doesn't matter. No matter where I go, I feel his eyes on me. A relentless reminder that he's out there, waiting, watching. And every so often, I'll find a note or a token, a twisted reminder of his obsession, a silent promise that he hasn't forgotten me. Somewhere out there, he's waiting, and he's made it very clear. He'll never let me go. Sometimes, nightmares don't end when you wake up. Some dreams cling to you, their echoes creeping into reality, making it hard to tell what's real and what's just your mind playing tricks. This story is about one woman's terrifying realization that the horror she thought she'd escaped was much closer than she ever imagined. It all started with a dream, a horrible, twisted dream that felt too real to be simply brushed off as a nightmare. I was in my childhood home. Everything exactly as I remembered it. From the chipped paint on the hallway walls to the creak in the third step of the staircase. But in this dream, there was something lurking in the shadows, a figure that hid just out of sight, moving soundlessly through the house, watching, waiting. I could feel it, an intense, suffocating presence, something dark and unexplainable. I wandered through each room, feeling like I was being drawn closer to this thing. Whatever it was calling me, beckoning me deeper into the heart of the house, until I found myself standing outside my childhood bedroom. I hesitated, feeling a chill run down my spine, and then the door slowly creaked open. Inside was the shadow, waiting. As I stepped closer, I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, louder, faster. The figure was tall, obscured in a darkness so thick it seemed to pulse, shifting and breathing. Just as I felt like I could no longer take it, the shadow lunged at me, and I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart racing, every nerve in my body alight with fear. I brushed it off as just a nightmare, but then, every night after, it came back. The same house, the same presence lurking, waiting, drawing me closer. Each dream felt longer, more intense, and each time I'd wake up at the same terrifying moment, gasping for breath, feeling like I'd been ripped out of a nightmare just before something truly horrible happened. Then things began to change. The dreams started leaking into my waking life. I'd see flashes of my childhood home in the corner of my eye, a hallway that looked eerily familiar, a door that seemed to lead somewhere I'd left long ago. I'd hear faint whispers, just on the edge of my hearing, calling my name. My phone would buzz, but when I checked, there'd be no notification, no missed call, only a blank screen reflecting my own wide-eyed expression. One night, the dream took a darker turn. I was back in my childhood bedroom, the air heavy and thick with a smell I couldn't place, something metallic and sharp. I reached out to turn on the lamp, but nothing happened. The darkness swallowed the room whole, and I felt that same suffocating presence close in around me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel it watching, leaning closer, whispering things in a language I couldn't understand. Then, a cold, skeletal hand reached out from the darkness and touched my face. It felt icy, like death itself was breathing down my neck. I woke up with a start, my face cold where the hand had touched me, the skin pale and marked as though something had truly been there. That's when I knew this was more than a dream. I tried telling my friends, but they laughed it off. "It's just stress," they said. "You're letting it get to you." But every night, the shadow in my dream grew closer. The hand lingered longer, and the words became clearer. "I'm coming for you," it whispered, the words slithering through my mind, even as I jolted awake. One night, desperate to end it, I decided to confront the shadow. I didn't want to run or hide anymore. I needed to know what it wanted. I went to sleep with a determination that surprised even me. And in my dream, I found myself back in my childhood home, standing at the edge of the hallway, staring into the pitch-black void that waited for me at the end. The door to my old bedroom was open, just a crack. I could feel it watching me from the other side. I took a step forward, then another, the floorboards creaking beneath me. With every step, the air grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. But I pressed on, finally reaching the door. Slowly, I pushed it open, bracing myself for whatever was waiting on the other side. Inside, the room was empty, at least at first. Then, the darkness began to move, shifting like smoke, and from it emerged the shadow. It was close, too close. Its skeletal hand reaching out for me again. I stood frozen, unable to move, as it whispered those same chilling words over and over. "I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you." Suddenly, the shadow's face came into view, inches from mine, and I saw it. My own face, twisted, eyes hollow and dead, staring back at me with a hunger I couldn't understand. I stumbled back, but the shadow reached out, gripping my arm with an iron hold, its fingers cold as ice, sending a jolt of pain through me. I woke up screaming, clutching my arm where the shadow had grabbed me. But even awake, I felt the pain lingering, sharp and throbbing. When I looked, there was a bruise, dark and purple, in the shape of a handprint. From that night on, the dream stopped. The shadow never returned, and the nightmare seemed to end. But I wasn't free. I could still feel it, lurking somewhere just beyond the edge of my consciousness, waiting. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that disappeared the moment I turned to look. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear those chilling words, whispered just out of reach. I'm coming for you. There's a chilling darkness that lurks in the minds of those who refuse to let go. Love, when twisted by envy and obsession, can turn beautiful memories into haunting, relentless nightmares. This story reveals the terrifying persistence of an ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept that her former lover had moved on, and the sinister, dangerous lengths she went to, reminding us that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. My husband had dated a beauty queen long before he met me. She was the epitome of beauty, confidence, and charisma, a woman who seemed to have everything. But after their breakup, she clung to him with a desperation that grew darker and more unsettling over time. Even years later, once he and I were married, she couldn't seem to accept that he had moved on. At first, it was harmless, if annoying. She'd call his phone at all hours of the night, her number hidden, her voice barely a whisper, as she asked to speak to him. When he'd hang up, she'd call back repeatedly, each call more insistent than the last. Then came the messages, her words ranging from begging to threatening, as though she couldn't decide if she wanted him back or wanted to see him suffer. One night, after weeks of silent harassment, she finally broke the silence with a chilling threat. "If I can't have you," she hissed over the phone, "then I'll make sure no one else will." There was a rage in her voice that sent a chill down my spine, a venom so potent it made my skin crawl. And that was just the beginning. The next morning, we discovered 2 of our car tires slashed, the rubber shredded as though by a knife. My heart sank as I remembered her voice on the phone, the anger and jealousy she wore like a cloak. My husband dismissed it, said it was probably kids playing a prank, but I knew, deep down, that she was behind it. After that, things escalated. We started noticing dents on our car, deep scratches along the side, like something had dragged a sharp object across it. One night, we came home to find that all the house lights were flickering, even though we hadn't left them on. And there, on our doorstep, was a single rose, its petals dyed black, with a note attached. "You'll regret this." My husband tried to brush it off, but I was terrified. I felt like we were living in a nightmare, always looking over our shoulders, wondering what she would do next. One evening, at a friend's party, she ambushed me as I stepped out of the bathroom. I barely recognized her at first. She looked different, almost deranged, her eyes wild, and her lips stretched in a twisted smile. She towered over me in her heels, making me feel small and helpless. So, she sneered. "You think you've won, don't you?" I tried to sidestep her, but she blocked my way, leaning in so close I could feel her hot breath on my face. "He'll always love me, you know, no matter what you do." Her words were a whisper, but they cut deep, filled with a bitterness that chilled me to the bone. I managed to escape, but the encounter left me shaken. My husband and I decided to take legal action, sending her a cease and desist letter, but it did nothing to deter her. In fact, it seemed to fuel her anger, as though she saw it as a challenge. She'd call from different numbers, leaving messages that started as whispers and escalated into screams, her voice filled with rage and despair. We sent another letter and another, each one more desperate than the last. But she was relentless, her obsession unyielding. And then, one night, she went too far. We were at a funeral for a mutual friend, standing quietly among the mourners. As I glanced around, I saw her watching us from across the room, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. She moved closer, slipping into our small circle, as though she belonged there, listening silently as we spoke. I felt trapped, her presence a constant reminder of the nightmare we couldn't escape. After that, my husband and I decided to take things to the next level, filing for a restraining order. It was a long, exhausting process, but we finally managed to get it approved. For a while, things were quiet. She disappeared from our lives. The calls stopped, and the nightmares faded. But she wasn't done with us. One day, my husband received a new Instagram follow request from an account he didn't recognize. It was blank. The profile picture, a simple, eerie, smiley face. But when he looked at the followers, there she was. Her name glaring back at him, like a specter from the past. Over the next few weeks, more requests flooded in, each from a different account, each one unmistakably her. Even now, years later, she still tries to worm her way back into our lives. Every few months, a new account pops up, or a new number appears on our call log, and every time, I feel that same fear creeping up my spine, wondering when she'll strike next, wondering if she'll ever let us go. We're vigilant, always watching, always prepared for the next encounter. We've even moved to a new city, hoping the distance will keep her at bay. But deep down, I know she's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to remind us that she'll never truly be gone. And so, we live in fear, haunted by the memory of a woman who refused to let go, a beauty queen turned monster, whose obsession turned our lives into a waking nightmare. Some places are shrouded in a unique, foreboding silence, a kind of silence that swallows all sound, that seeps into the bones, unsettling and cold. For the young and curious, cemeteries are often more than a resting place for the departed. They are an invitation to adventure, a mysterious landscape of shadowy headstones and twisting paths. But sometimes, when curiosity leads one too deep, the unseen residents or even darker visitors of these grounds make themselves known. This is a tale of a night where a casual stroll through an old cemetery transformed into a terrifying flight from something far worse than just shadows. My friends and I had a strange fascination with the cemetery near our town. It wasn't just a graveyard to us. It was a place that dared you to test your courage. The old church looming at the far end only added to its haunting allure. The cemetery was beautiful in an eerie way, with overgrown plants creeping over the headstones and narrow, maze-like paths that seemed to twist and turn forever. Most of the time, it was a harmless adventure, but one night, we discovered a resident lurking in the shadows, and he was very much alive. It was nearly midnight when my friends, Sam, David, Charlie, Mike, and I decided to sneak into the cemetery. The skies were cloudy, blocking out the moonlight, which left the whole area cloaked in a dense, oppressive darkness. We climbed over the gate and made our way through the narrow paths lined with graves. With every step, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence blanketed the area. As we moved deeper, we began hearing soft footsteps behind us. They were faint, but unmistakable. We froze and looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but all we saw were shadowy headstones and the distant outline of the church. Thinking it might be our nerves, we pushed on, our laughs and whispers growing quieter as the silence crept back over us. Then David, who was ahead of us, whispered, "Did anyone else see that?" He pointed towards the church, where a cloaked figure had just disappeared behind a tombstone. Our eyes darted back and forth, but the figure was gone. Sam laughed nervously, insisting it was just another kid playing a prank, but I could see the fear in his eyes. As we continued, we saw the cloaked figure again, closer this time. He seemed to be following us, hiding behind gravestones, creeping closer with every turn we took. His cloak was tattered, and his face was hidden beneath a dark hood, casting an unnatural shadow over his features. We couldn't see his face, but we could feel his gaze, cold and sharp. We tried to ignore it, hoping he would lose interest, but as we rounded a corner, we saw him again, standing in the path ahead of us, blocking our way. In his hand was something that glinted in the faint light, a large hammer. His head tilted slightly, as if he were studying us, sizing us up. "Run!" David shouted, breaking the spell of terror that had frozen us in place. We took off in different directions, trying to lose him in the maze of headstones. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding as I heard the crunch of gravel and the heavy thud of footsteps chasing me. I could feel his presence close behind, the chilling realization that he wasn't just following us for fun. I ducked behind a large tombstone, hoping he hadn't seen me. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. I held my breath, listening to the silence, praying he would walk away. Suddenly, I heard the scrape of metal against stone. I looked out from my hiding spot and saw him dragging his hammer along the ground, his gaze sweeping the graves, his head turning slowly, as if he could sense exactly where I was hiding. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just trying to scare us. He was hunting us. I signaled to my friends, who were hidden a few rows over. They saw the terror in my eyes, and without a word, we started to edge our way back toward the gate, staying low, moving as silently as we could. But just as we were nearing the exit, we heard a soft, slow laugh echo through the cemetery. We turned and saw him standing by the entrance, his face still hidden, but his stance was different now, more aggressive, like a predator about to pounce. He raised his hammer, took a step forward, and that was all we needed to see. We bolted toward the far end of the cemetery, where a broken section of the fence offered a chance of escape. I could hear him behind us, his footsteps heavy and relentless, his breathing raspy and uneven. We climbed over the fence, scrambling to freedom just as he reached the other side, his hammer crashing against the metal with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Once we were out, we kept running until we reached the edge of town, gasping for breath, our legs burning. But we didn't stop until we were far, far away from the cemetery. That night, we all agreed never to go back. The police later told us that no one should have been in the cemetery at that hour, but they never found any trace of the cloaked man. Now, whenever I pass by that cemetery, I can't help but feel that cold gaze again, hidden behind the gravestones, waiting for his next midnight visitor. In the heart of every small town lies a secret, a mystery, that locals speak of in hushed tones, if at all. They say that late at night, when the world grows quiet and the shadows stretch long, there are places best left undisturbed. For Lucy and me, that place was a forgotten tent, hidden in the shadows of an old carnival on the edge of town. A house of horrors, they called it, though most seemed unaware it was even there. The tent sat at the fringes, shrouded in darkness, almost like it was waiting. We thought we were seeking thrills that summer night, a simple adventure, maybe a scare or two. But as we stepped into that dim, dusty tent, we found ourselves in a nightmare beyond our imagination, where something sinister lurked, waiting patiently for curious souls like ours to wander too far. That night, we would learn that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left unopened. This was one of them. It was a warm summer night when my friend Lucy and I decided to attend a late-night carnival that had just rolled into town. The carnival was set up on the outskirts, where the city lights faded, and the vast empty fields began. There was something magical about it. The distant laughter, the bright lights against the dark sky, and the music that drifted into the night air. But as we would soon learn, this carnival held secrets that shouldn't have been disturbed. As we walked past the spinning rides, the bright lights, and the stands filled with candy and games, we noticed a tent far off from the rest. It was dark, hidden in the shadows, and seemed abandoned. No one else seemed to notice it, as if it existed in another world entirely. We were drawn to it, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and a need for adventure. Dare you to go in? Lucy whispered with a mischievous grin, nudging me toward the entrance. The sign above the tent was faded and unreadable, but we could make out a few words. House of Horrors. The fabric of the tent was tattered and worn, flapping softly in the breeze, and as we stepped closer, we felt a sudden chill, even though the night was warm. Inside, the tent was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting eerie shadows on the walls. Dust floated through the air, and the scent of something old and rotting filled our nostrils. A single path led us through a maze of rooms, each one stranger and darker than the last. We passed mannequins dressed in torn, vintage clothes, with hollow, painted eyes that seemed to follow us, each one frozen in a twisted pose of terror. "This is freaky," Lucy whispered, glancing around, her face pale. But we kept going, our curiosity outweighing our fear. The next room was filled with mirrors, all cracked and covered in a layer of grime. As we walked through, our reflections seemed to warp, distorting our faces into grotesque shapes. Just as we were about to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in one of the mirrors, a figure standing behind us. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Lucy nodded, her eyes wide. "Let's just keep moving." We quickened our pace, our footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room seemed darker, the air heavier. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, like the tent itself was alive, watching our every move. As we entered another room, we heard a faint whisper, a voice that seemed to come from all around us. Stay forever. We looked at each other, frozen in terror. The voice was low, guttural, and it seemed to resonate from within the very walls. We tried to turn back, but the path had disappeared. The layout of the tent had changed, trapping us in a maze of endless, twisting corridors. Panic set in as we ran through room after room, searching for an exit. The mannequins we had seen earlier were now positioned differently, closer, their arms reaching out as if trying to grab us. One of them even had a tear-streaked face, its glassy eyes staring right at me, mouth open in a silent scream. Finally, we stumbled into the last room, but instead of an exit, there was a small stage with a single, flickering spotlight. The silence was overwhelming. As we approached the stage, a figure emerged from the shadows. A clown. But this wasn't the happy, colorful clown from the carnival. Its face was painted in smudged black and white, the makeup cracked and peeling, with hollow, empty eyes that stared straight through us. "Welcome," it rasped, voice gravelly and unnatural. "Are you ready to play?" Lucy and I backed away, but the clown advanced, its movements slow and jerky, like a puppet on strings. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed at us, its smile stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharpened, yellowed teeth. Without thinking, we bolted, running back through the twisted maze of rooms. But every turn brought us back to the same room with the stage, where the clown waited, grinning, its laugh echoing through the tent. Desperation overtook us as we tried again and again, each path leading us back to that horrible stage. The clown was getting closer now, its laughter filling the space, louder and louder, drilling into our minds. Finally, Lucy found a tear in the tent's fabric. We scrambled through it, tumbling out into the cool night air, gasping and shivering. The tent stood silent behind us, the entrance now closed, as if it had never invited us in. We ran all the way back to the carnival, looking over our shoulders, half expecting the clown to burst out of the tent and chase us. But as we looked back, the tent seemed to fade into the darkness, disappearing among the carnival lights. We never spoke of that night again, and the next day, when we returned to the carnival, the tent was gone. It was as if it had never existed. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that laughter, faint and distant, echoing in my mind, calling me back to the House of Horrors. There are tales that circulate in every town, stories that are more than just legend, more than simple fear-mongering. They have a life of their own, spreading from person to person, each retelling woven with a new layer of mystery and dread. On Pine Street, there was one such tale, a story that most people spoke of only in whispers, as if saying its name too loud would make it real. They called it the Vanishing House. Some claimed the house was cursed, that it appeared only on nights when the mist was thick and the air was cold, like it had slipped through from another dimension. Others insisted that it was a portal to something darker, a place that lured the curious and foolish alike. No one ever stayed long enough to find out for sure, except those who never came back. This Halloween, I was about to discover that not all legends are simply stories. My friend Ben and I had no idea what lay in wait for us in that house. We thought we could explore it, unravel its secrets, and make it back home with a good story. But we were wrong. We were so wrong. Pine Street was ordinary enough, quiet, lined with neat little homes, and filled with old trees that cast long shadows in the evening. But nestled at the end of the street, hidden behind a tangled wall of ivy and trees that never seemed to lose their leaves, was the Vanishing house. For years, no one could explain it, and most avoided the topic altogether. Yet, like all forbidden things, it drew curiosity, especially mine. I was 16, and my friend Ben and I had spent countless nights swapping ghost stories, daring each other to explore the unknown. That Halloween, we chose to uncover the mystery of the Vanishing house. They said the house was visible only on certain nights, that it appeared slightly different every time, as if the rooms shifted and expanded in strange ways. Rumors circulated about people going inside and never coming back, their voices faintly heard echoing on stormy nights. We arrived at Pine Street just as the last traces of sunlight bled away, swallowed by thick clouds overhead. The air grew unnaturally cold, and a thick mist began to creep across the ground. It was then we saw it. The house standing tall, its dark, pointed roof piercing the sky. The windows dark and silent, like hollow eyes staring back at us. "Are we really doing this?" Ben asked, his voice shaking, but determined. "We've come this far," I replied, swallowing my fear. We walked toward it, each step heavy, as if the ground was pulling us down, trying to hold us back. The door creaked open with a dreadful sound, and as we stepped inside, an intense smell of mildew and decay filled our noses. The air was thick, like breathing through a damp cloth, and the silence was so deep it almost felt loud. The house was enormous on the inside, far larger than it seemed from outside. Each room stretched impossibly long, with ceilings that towered above us, dripping with shadows. As we moved deeper, the hallways twisted in strange angles, doors appearing and vanishing, as if the walls were alive. The sense of wrongness grew, a sensation of being watched by something just beyond our sight. We entered a large room at the end of a corridor, where a grand staircase spiraled up into darkness. On the walls hung portraits of people in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes following us wherever we went. It felt as though they were whispering, the sound barely audible, but clawing at the edges of our minds. Then I heard it, a faint, distant laughter, almost like a child's, echoing from somewhere above. "Did you hear that?" I asked Ben, my heart hammering. But he didn't answer. He was staring up the staircase, his eyes wide, fixed on something I couldn't see. Suddenly, he turned and bolted up the stairs. "Ben, wait!" I yelled, chasing after him. But it felt as though the staircase stretched longer with every step I took. By the time I reached the top, he was gone. "Oh, Ben!" I shouted into the shadows. but my voice felt swallowed by the oppressive silence. I ran down a hallway, pushing open doors frantically, but every room was empty, filled only with an icy, suffocating air. I began to panic, unsure if I'd ever find him again, or even find my way out. Then I saw something in the corner of a room, a small, shadowed figure. As I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't Ben. It was a girl. Her back turned to me, dressed in a white nightgown, her hair long and dark. She stood perfectly still, her presence sending a chill down my spine. "Excuse me, have you seen my friend?" I whispered, not wanting to startle her. The girl slowly turned, revealing a face covered in cracks, as if she were made of porcelain. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, eyes hollow and lifeless. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's gone, and soon, so will you." Oh. I stumbled backward, feeling the floor give way beneath me. I fell, the sensation of tumbling down an endless void, shadows pressing in from all sides. And then I was back outside, on the lawn, gasping for air. I scrambled to my feet, looking around wildly for Ben, but he was nowhere in sight. I tried to rush back toward the house, but it was gone, vanished, without a trace. Days turned into weeks, but Ben never returned. His parents searched tirelessly, but there were no leads, no clues, and no sign of him ever being found. Pine Street residents claimed the Vanishing house had always been empty, that no one had seen a house there in years. They whispered that it was cursed, that it devoured those foolish enough to enter. Even now, years later, I still hear his voice sometimes, faint and echoing on dark, stormy nights, calling for help from a place I'll never dare to go back to.